Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second quarterly explorations webinar. As financial advisors, we feel we do a lot more than managing assets. By taking a holistic approach, we feel we help people in achieving their goals, peace of mind, and overall fulfillment. In that vein, today we have two speakers. First, we had two topics we're going to cover. First, we have Joe Halpern, who's our CIO. Joe's going to be doing a Q&A on currency. And secondly, we have a special guest speaker, Shefali Reina, a Forbes executive coach, and she's going to discuss brain science surrounding extreme change with us. And we'll kick it off with Joe. And Joe, if you're ready, you can start it up, and then we'll get to Shefali towards the back end of the call.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. So the first thing we'll talk about today, and thank you everybody for attending the call, is obviously money, right? That's the topic. And, one of the questions that comes up a lot and some of the conversations that we get in the financial world is, why isn't currency backed by anything, right? And if you look over history, there's really been three monetary systems. You either had gold or silver or copper or similar. So people would literally walk around with gold to pay for things. And then they kind of graduated to paper backed by gold. And then at least in this country in the 70s, Nixon removed us from the gold standard. And if you've ever met a gold bug, what they always talk about is that our money is made up, it's worthless, it's baloney, there's no backing to it. And they get part of it right. The part that's right is that money is made up. It's a totally made up convention by us humans, and it's made up to standardize items, right? So it allows us to trade, it allows us to easily carry it in our back pocket if we want to pay. Nowadays we have credit cards, so it's attached to money, but ultimately money is made up. And, to connect it to anything or to attach it to anything is a bit of a false construct, especially when you come to gold, right? And the reason why is because gold has no connection to productivity. And I'll give a really good example, or I think it's a good example at least. If you think of farming, right? Right now we have 8 billion people in the world. There's a reason we did not have even 1 billion people in the world 300 years ago. And it's because farming cannot support it, right? And we've had so many gains in productivity around creating food that not only do we have like multiples more people in the world than we've ever had in the past, but there's more people on a percentage basis that are food secure. Unfortunately, there's still people who are not food secure, but on a percentage basis, it's that. And so there's been this amazing increase in productivity, but gold is finite. So it can't grow with that productivity, and it can't grow with wealth. And you simply run into an issue if you actually backed it by gold, because you have no flexibility around it, right? What the government just did on the $2.2 trillion, bailout, how do you do that with gold? Where's the government finding new gold to do it? Are you just raising the value? And then if you hold gold, what do you do with it? So dollars are actually extremely flexible. And we're just never going back to gold because it's way too limiting and has nothing to do with productivity. That make sense?
Okay, but then it does make sense. So then, but would we ever consider then FAM? I guess talking about that for a second, as an asset investment, would we consider investing in gold, or for that matter, Bitcoin or other alternatives that the other alternative assets like that?
Yeah, sure. So, first, I would say, there's some interesting corollaries with Bitcoin as compared to gold. And there's a lot of these currencies out there like Bitcoin. Bitcoin in particular, they use the term mining when they talk about Bitcoin, right? So the whole method of creating new Bitcoins is there's a randomizer and machines go and try to solve it, and you need a lot of energy to solve it, and then you mine a Bitcoin, which is very similar to gold, right? We mine gold. And like gold, or maybe even more, Bitcoin's actually more finite than gold because there's a half-life, and they've created this mechanism where, I don't remember the year, something like 2035, the last Bitcoin will be mined. While gold, we may be able to find gold in the deep ocean, we may be able to find gold out in space, so it's not as finite as Bitcoin. And the whole point to that is that neither of them are used as currencies right now. Nobody has gold in their back pocket. Bitcoin is primarily not used as currency. They're really holders of wealth. And I'd say with Bitcoin, it's even more so. It's just a perceived wealth as opposed to gold, which actually has some conductive uses out there. So you could actually use it as a tool. In terms of FAM investing in these products, probably not is the reality. I mean, we look at it, we analyze it, can it work? But ultimately, and I'll take Bitcoin as the best example of it. It really is a perceived value. I see the uses in our exploration in the document that went out. We spoke about Venezuela. If I was living in Venezuela, I would probably try to convert money into Bitcoin because I could use that Bitcoin anywhere in the world. And if I could escape Venezuela, which I would definitively try to do, I could then have my money, right? And people have had this issue historically over time. You try to escape a place, it's very hard to escape a place with your value intact. And Bitcoin is a method to do that. So there's obvious use cases for Bitcoin, but for us, it's really hard for us to get our mind around, how that doesn't change to some other product that may do a better job than Bitcoin A. And at the end of the day, it's a made up entity. And so there's just a lot of psychology involved, and we don't invest in that way.
So you're talking about a devaluing currency like Venezuela. So, switching that back to our shores, what are the pros and cons then of our U.S. dollar and a strength in the U.S. dollar? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, the first thing to understand is, and Talia, could you move to, I think it's slide 5, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, slide 5. So one more down. Sorry, slide 6, I guess. Yeah, there we go. So, the first thing to understand about our currency and the weak versus strong U.S. dollar is on a national level, when we're dealing with national product, it really doesn't make a difference. And why I say that is in our daily lives, when you go and you buy a Starbucks coffee, when you buy chicken at the supermarket, based on how the dollar is doing relative to these other currencies, has no relationship to that coffee. I'll take it back on Starbucks because I guess coffee is international, but chickens really are not. Chickens are more local, their feed is local, everything's local about a chicken. And so we're all dealing with the dollar, and whether the dollar goes up or down versus some international currency, who really cares? So on a national level, in a lot of ways, when we're dealing with local items, it doesn't make a difference, right? When you think of a strong dollar, you actually have cheaper imports, right? You have cheaper international travel, which is nice for cheaper vacations. So all that works out. But then you also, when you have a stronger dollar, it's hard on manufacturing, right? And I may take it, if you want to, Mark, after this to trade wars, right? When you're talking about manufacturing, right? If we manufacture something here and we have a strong dollar, then our products become much more expensive internationally, which may make people decide to buy locally as opposed to U.S. made. And then obviously the opposite is true for weak, for a weak dollar. And I kind of brought up Venezuela here because here you have an example of, where a cup of coffee has exploded to 1,500 times the price it was, a year ago, right? And that's an area where there's just a lack of trust in government, and they're also really reliant on the international community, right, as an example.
So you talked about trade war, but how does that currency play out in U.S.-China trade war, which is basically the question when people think of trade war that crosses everyone's mind?
Yeah, and if you don't mind going back to page 2, hopefully I got that one right. Page 3. Okay, we got a cover page. Now I got it. I think I could get there. So, with China, we have a trade war, right? And that trade war was created partially on IP, right? Our stance is that they're stealing IP from us. Another part of it is artificially maintaining a lower level of their yuan versus the dollar. And so here is, I put the euro versus US dollar and the yuan versus the US dollar here. And as you could see, I circled a couple spots on the chart, and they're just perfectly flat. The reason they're perfectly flat is because in the 2000s, and then again, from 2005 to 2010, they actually raised the peg a bit, and then they had it flat again. The yuan was pegged to the US dollar, right? And so, we've spoken about the US being the world reserve currency, and I think on the past exploration, we talked a little bit about, well, can anybody replace us? And the obvious thought was, could China replace us, because they're the second largest economy in the world and they're growing much more rapidly than we are. This graph right here catches one of the reasons they cannot replace us at the moment. It's because they're still playing around a lot with their currency, which makes it artificial, which also makes it hard for people to trust them. And then if you go, Talia, to the next page, this is a Wall Street Journal article that came out October 12th, so 3 days ago. China taps the brakes on a yuan rally. By China's economic rebound and the country's relatively high interest rates, the yuan has just closed out its best quarter against the dollar in 12 years, right? And so what did China do? What they did was they imposed a 20% reserve requirement. And what that means is for every $100 that are, involved in these currency trades or in these banks, for every $100, they have to reserve $20. And that is a restriction, right, which keeps more currency in-house, and it essentially will lower the yuan versus the dollar. So what China wants to do is they want to have a weak currency, and the reason they still want to have a weak currency is because they're still a huge exporter. And so it works in their favor, right? And that's one of the items that we push up against them, right? Because if we want manufacturing to come back to this shore, and I won't go into the nuances of whether we really want that or not, but just taking that statement on the level of that, of do we want manufacturing coming back to this world? Well, if they're artificially keeping their currencies low, it becomes incredibly hard for us to compete with them. And the problem is that they're doing something artificial, right? So, and then go one more page, I'm sorry, if you don't mind, Talia, it's page 5, right? And so, this is the fractional reserve banking system. It probably helps just to talk about it really quick. For every $100 that's placed in a bank, the bank only has to keep $10. And so $90 goes out into the system. And then that $90 may get invested, and $81 could then go and get loaned again out into the system. And so that's really the way the Fed leverages all our banks to try to ease and provide, money and currency into the economy. And if they decide, we need to restrict this a little, they could go back in and say, okay, raise the reserve.
So you mentioned the Fed there, Joe. One of the things, Fed's main job is to control inflation. So I guess one of the things I would say to you, what are the risks of inflation, or what people are talking about deflation, and what do you think is more of a risk, and how would that affect us?
Yeah, great question. Can you go to page 7? It must be inflation introduced, right? That's the general thought. But there's a reason behind why the Fed did this package, right? Where they try to, help save the economy. The thought process right now is that was a really important move and the right move in placing $2.2 trillion in the economy, because what they were doing there was COVID's really a huge deflationary event. It's hugely deflationary in that businesses are closing, people are not spending money. And you could see right on the top, and thank you, Talia, very much for finding it, there's falling demand, right? So COVID right off the bat created a falling demand because nobody was leaving their houses, nobody was spending money. And then the next step is business losses, right? And that obviously occurred. And when that happens from a competitive standpoint, you have to lower prices. And then you have layoffs and wage reductions. This actually is a good slide. I was kidding before, but I think it's actually maybe the best slide because you could just follow it and it explains in a real sense what was going to occur in COVID. And so there was this real deflationary risk, and I'd say we still have that deflationary risk. And that's why we're talking about another bailout package coming out, momentarily, whether, most likely after the election, to help keep the economy floating. And then when you think about, okay, well, now all that money is there, what happens if we get going again and we resume growth? Well, the Fed has so many tools at its disposal to stop inflation. One of those would be raising taxes. Another one would be raising interest rates. So, we're concerned about deflation. My feeling and generally the feeling out there is that, these bailouts are the right thing to do. And unfortunately, at some point, we'll have to deal with our debt levels as a country and as a world. And, for another, it's a topic for another day. So
with that in mind, Joe, how do we use that, and how does that impact the way we manage portfolios and the way we look at, overall asset allocation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So currency affects our overall, the way we manage our portfolios. There's not a lot to do with it except for to diversify, right? So we do invest globally. We have a portion of every model invested in international companies. And obviously currency has an effect there, but we just don't know where currency is going. And as long as we're comfortable with general countries, which you are with developed and emerging markets, we're fine investing there. Currency also affects interest rates to some extent. And so we're constantly watching it and monitoring it. And if there's a reason to move based on currency, we would. And so that kind of sums it up. We're aware of it. We look to diversify it, but we don't do anything really proactive with it.
Gotcha, thanks. So I guess since we are breaking this into two speakers, the last question, which is probably the one that's on pretty much everybody's mind, is, what's our view of the risk reward heading up to the election, and how do we view that systemic, what's happening?
Yeah, no, it really is. It's on my mind for sure. It's interesting times here in the U.S. Talia, if you don't mind going one slide down. In fact, a number of clients have requested, to my understanding from advisors, a pre-election review. I think it's a good idea. We've taken some steps within model portfolios to temporarily de-risk a little bit where we can around the edges on this one. So the thought is high level on the elections. If there is a blue wave, meaning the president, Biden wins the election, the Senate becomes blue, that's a short-term positive, because then, as just mentioned, there will be a bailout. There will be something like another $2.2 trillion package that comes through. Probably the same thing will happen if there's a Republican sweep. The worst case scenario is a mixed result where, let's say, Biden wins, so you have a Democrat as president and you have Republicans running the Senate. It's going to be very, very hard to push through a package. There's going to be a lot of political gamemanship, and it'll be pretty bad for the American public, just on a high level. I brought this slide here because obviously, my gut is everybody on this call is feeling it. There's 7 plagues that afflict democracies. I talked about it on the last exploration. I highlighted the top 3: parties eroding, citizens not trusting one another, voters losing interest. There's some level of risk of us not knowing the outcome of this election the next day. It's actually probable. There's some level of risk of people not accepting what the outcome is. And there's some level of risk, unfortunately, of civil unrest on some level. I do not own shares in Netflix directly. The Social Dilemma is a program worth watching to understand how social media is exacerbating these top 3. I think it's a really important watch. So that's, again, I think it's a little scary what's going on there, and people should understand it. So, the highlight there is, we do think that there's some risk going into the elections. Hopefully it's relatively low. And we are watching diligently and doing what we can, given our long-term outlooks and given our our role as really managing for long-term, for retirements for next generation. Mark, thank you very much for the questions. I know we're going to move it over to Shefali, so I'm going to introduce her. It is an honor to introduce Shefali Rana. I had the privilege of working with Shefali at Lehman Brothers post-bankruptcy well over a decade ago, where she was the chief operating officer of maybe all the units there, maybe the whole firm. And so it really was great working with her. We've maintained a relationship. She's now an executive coach working with high-performing ROI-focused executives and board members. I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about navigating extreme change. Really excited to hear what she has to say. And so with that, the floor is yours, Shefali.
Thank you so much, Joe. What a fantastic presentation, and thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here. I am trying to start a video, so hopefully I'll be able to do that real quick, but let me jump in at least and talk about this topic that is really fascinating for me, and I think for many of you, is how does the brain navigate extreme change, and what can we do to leverage brain science to survive and thrive. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, I think you can see me now. So what is really at the center of a lot of the work that I do with executives is how can we optimize our performance? How can we optimize our well-being by understanding how the brain works? And especially in these last 7 months with what has unfolded in terms of huge uncertainties, huge stakes, extreme change, this has become even more important and has been really valuable in terms of helping top leaders, helping founders work more effectively in navigating their own self and navigating others in this landscape. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so today what I want you to take away from this is essentially 2 simple things, and we'll demystify, we'll simplify things. The first is, what really happens to my brain in uncertainty and in extreme change? Like, what is the physiology piece? What are the systems that are working? And the second is, knowing that, what is it that I can do? What are the 3 simple actionable tips that I might take away from this conversation that I can activate in my life and just see a shift in how I'm navigating change? The next slide. So question 1, which is on your minds is, okay, how does the brain work really? We think of the brain, and I like for us to think about it as almost this incredible technology that we have at our disposal. And parts of it are very evolved and very sophisticated, and parts of it are still sitting and did not evolve from the Stone Ages. And so if you step back and you think about, hey, what are the 3 simple concepts that I can think of? Think of one concept is that my brain is wired for survival, which means that it's constantly scanning for threats. It's like a scanner for saying, is this a threat? Is this a threat? Is this a threat? And in that scan, if it perceives a threat, and it could be anything, in the Stone Ages, it was a lion in front of you. Today, it can just be an unexpected development in a meeting. So if there is a threat in front of you, it causes in your brain and your body a fight, flight, fear response, a freeze response, where we often experience the brain freeze and the stress. That's kind of one system that is operating from the Stone Ages. Another system that you want to think about is your brain has an anticipation machine. Whether you want it or not, the brain is constantly trying to predict what's going to happen next, and is constantly trying to predict how you might act in that to survive, to thrive, for your well-being. That's just because it wants the organism to survive, the Homo sapien to survive. And so that's something that's good for us to know. The third piece is that it's built on efficiency models, which means it does not like using extra energy to do new things, and it wants to default to habits. What does that mean for us? What that means for us is that, we are going to be mindful that, when there is a stress perceived threat event, my brain is going to overreact because it is wired that way. I am going to have a fear response in the brain and the body. The second thing to think about is that there is going to be this prediction machine, this mental model that is going to be working. And my job is to make sure that that machine has the right information, has the right tools to create the best models. And the third piece is, how can I build habits around the survival piece, around the build for survival piece, around the anticipation piece, that I can now operate in normal state of play no matter what happens. Now, how can I build a habit of basically surviving and thriving in extreme change? And brain just says, oh, this is just normal. I got this. So let's go to the next slide. So now question two, we've talked about the models. The second thing is, hey, what really happens to my brain in extreme change? And I have a visual of a roller coaster, to plant that seed that in many ways for the untrained brain, that is what is happening, around extreme change. We can go to the next slide. So what happens really, and so let's look at the first box on the left in the slide, which is we talked about this really sophisticated prediction system. In the sophisticated prediction system, think about it almost like a software, that there's a mental model of, hey, what is happening right now? There is lots of probabilities about what are the outcomes that are possible, similar to what Joe explained around the political landscape. These are the 5 options that are possible. And then the brain is trying to say, hey, what's the most likely outcome? And how will I act and behave in those most likely outcomes? This is kind of brain at normal level. And it's doing that for you in every way and shape that you show up in the world, in your work, in your life, in your personal decisions, all of that. So what happens when there's extreme change? So go back to, March and go back to when we first encountered all of the elements around what was happening and unfolding on COVID. Brain did not have a mental model for most of us around how to play in that. We didn't even know that was ever a likelihood until, a little while before. So for the brain, it was, hey, I don't even know what's happening right now. I don't know what is true right now. I don't know the range of outcomes. What are the variables that are even possible? And what is the likelihood of that? And so it goes into this disruption overdrive. And there is a huge amount of stress that's activated is because the prediction system is like, I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you what's going to happen. Watch out. This is going to be a huge threat. So what that was in the system, in the brain. And then we talk about, hey, what was really happening in our experience? And then we talk about our experience. We all remember, this kind of chronic elements of stress, at different levels, lots of anxiety, many of us feeling exhausted at different points in time, potentially some folks thinking about catastrophic thinking, brain is hyper alert. In the body, sometimes you're feeling some sense of panic or some sense of out of control. For some folks, heart rate, blood pressure, sleep challenges, all of those things. So there's this collective experience of different ranges of stress that results in that prediction error and that stress system caused by that. So let's go to next. So now the question is, what can we do really to thrive in uncertainty, knowing what we know about these concepts in the brain? And the work that I do with the executives is around building habits around these pieces. That let's build habits. Now that we know the threat system exists and this is how it shows up, let's build habits to neutralize the threat system. Let's build habits to get our brain comfortable with change so that it doesn't feel like that roller coaster. And let's build habits around minimizing prediction errors in a very strategic and very intentional way. And I want to share a couple of tips with you on each of these that you can take away and explore. I meant to say this earlier. If you have questions that are coming up for you, just type them in the chat box, in the Q&A box, and then we can address them at the end. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so brain habit number 1. This is very simple. Just knowing that this is just my brain technology. So what happens is once you know and once you acknowledge in that moment of panic, in that moment of stress, in that moment of uncertainty, that, I don't have to believe everything I think. I don't have to believe everything I feel. This is just my brain technology. So when I'm feeling stressed, it's about, oh, my threat system is activated. this is what I need to do to neutralize it. When I'm feeling, in hyperdrive and sleep deprivation, oh, it's the prediction errors that are occurring. Let's make sure we get the resources to the brain to minimize prediction errors. Just that simple concept, if you take away, you will notice that it'll pause the panic, it'll depersonalize, because this is not just about me, this is now about every human. So if you're Mr. Human and you have a brain, this happens. So remember, this is just my brain technology is a great way to depersonalize. We can go to habit number 2. Habit number 2. So this is about building the habit. How can I make sure that my brain thinks I play well in uncertainty, I play well in change? And that is about, let me get my brain on an ongoing basis comfortable with discomfort. Meaning new things. Doesn't mean, giving myself pain. Means how can I do new things? How can I learn new things? How can I put myself on the spot where there is some risk associated with outcomes? And when I do all of this on a regular basis, what's going to happen is the brain is going to be like, I got this. Like, I know how to play in uncertain situations. I know that we are going to figure it out, right? I need to kind of do this, this, and this in my system. It takes me so much time, and then we go and figure it out. So building those habits becomes extremely valuable. And, we can't do anything about what happened 7 months before in how we experienced uncertainty and extreme change. What we can do is, how are we going to live now? Are we going to continue to do the same things on, in reps, or are we going to invite ourselves into more uncomfortable situations and really give that training to our brain that it's okay, extreme change is something that I'm, constantly navigating. Let's go to brain habit number 3. Okay, so this one is the one that, is very important from a cognitive perspective. Is now that we know that the prediction machine in the brain is organized in a certain way, what can we do in terms of learning, in terms of resources, in terms of goals around deploying the right stuff for that machine? So if you think of the mental model, what's happening is the mental model is set up based on your existing experience and your existing outcomes. So first thing to think about is, can I build a rule for myself that when I think of outcomes and I think of plans, I think in multiple scenarios. So my brain already has programmed that this, if X happens, then we will do X, Y. If Y happens, we will do Z. So that range, and the brain has built neural pathways around that. The second piece is, what exactly are you consuming? We don't even think about the information that we are consuming through social media, through the day-to-day news, cable news, all of those pieces. But think of it as, this is what you're ingesting in your brain. This is what you're giving to your mental models. And so being strategic about making sure that I am going out there and I am getting all of the big picture future trend information, the macro information. And kudos to all of you who are here listening to the presentation that Joe just did, because that's about big picture, right? Let's understand concepts, let's understand systems. And the more you give your brain information around what's happening, how's the world shifting in a macro way, not the day-to-day, the more power you're going to give to your mental models to be able to predict better and to have fewer prediction errors. And the third piece around this is, how can you pivot your goals? Are we going to be the type of people who are stuck on certain goals and just deeply anchored? Or are we able to be agile around the goal landscape and pivot as needed if the world has changed? So bringing those three together, and there is so much research around that bringing those three together really helps our brain's mental models, our prediction systems minimize prediction error, reduces stress, and helps us just be a better place to navigate whatever comes in a more effective way. So those were my 3 brain tips. We can go to the next slide, which is just synthesizing the 3, which is just, this is just my brain tech. Get your brain comfortable with the discomfort of new things and deploy these resources of smart thinking, learning habits. So you're thinking in scenarios, getting information, being agile. And if you just take on these 3 simple things, you will notice that the uncertainty and the extreme change landscape just becomes easier to navigate, and you just operate in a more optimized way. I think that's the end of my presentation. If there's any questions, I'm happy to address.
Okay, Shefali, could you hear me?
I can.
Okay, excellent. First of all, thank you so much. It was a great presentation. This is just my brain tech is a really nice tip. Love it. I had a question of my own, if you don't mind. I see we have at least one question from the audience at the moment, but to give them some more time. Number 2 was play with uncertainty, right? Was that it? I wrote it down, play with uncertainty.
Yeah. Get comfortable
and so the whole
with uncomfortable, yeah.
Right, so I love that concept, and it's something where, as you mentioned, everybody has their habits, they're comfortable in their habits, and you always kind of want to teach people to try to break out and, you know, do things, I guess, as you said, to make them uncomfortable. Could you give some ideas of things to practice that on, right? You know what I mean? Like, is there something, you know, almost like if you went to the gym, you could lift weights, you become a little stronger. To put yourself in those situations, you know, I'm having a hard time. I mean, I could think of some, but a little bit of a hard time of thinking of things that I could easily do to shake things up, to demonstrate that to myself, to raise that level of confidence, to be able to, you know, as you said, not be scared of something and go do it. So do you have any like easy, good examples to?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, so uncomfortable is essentially, like you said, whatever is scary, right, to us. And so each person's kind of uncomfortable palette in some ways is going to be different. So whether it's things like, I want to go and meet those 3 new people and pick their brains on XYZ, but I've been holding myself back from doing that because it just feels embarrassing, or, you know, XYZ. Just, it's a new thing. It's you're stepping outside your, in many ways, comfort zone, and you're going and do that. So that's like a really simple thing you can do next week. You know, there's somebody we've been wanting to speak with, get their perspective on something, go do that. So maybe something you want to learn and put yourself on the spot of going to then, present somewhere. For many people, you know, in the normal landscape, public speaking was something like that. But even simpler things, you know, we talk about trying to meet a diverse set of people. And when I say diverse, I mean cognitive diversity, right? So we all end up interacting with people who are in many ways exactly like us in terms of how we think. You know, they have the same thoughts, they have the same kind of ecosystem. And so stepping out of our ecosystems and interacting with different folks brings different elements into our life. If you kind of still, you know, take walks and are able to go outside, maybe taking different routes, right? Changing up your schedule, like little things like that, just kind of bringing change on a regular basis. And building that narrative that, you know what, I'm the kind of person who is bring it on. You know, uncomfortable in change will train your brain to start thinking that way and build that neural pathway. Did
That's
that
great.
answer
So,
what you wanted?
yeah, that did answer. I have a follow-up, but I'm going to hold on my follow-up because we have a few questions from the listeners. So I want to go there, and if there's time, I'll come back because this is ultimately for you know, our advisors, our clients. So here's a question: what strategies? This is a little similar, but what strategies do you recommend for becoming comfortable with change? So
Yeah,
it may be similar, but
yes,
yeah.
I think it's Christian's question is, I think, the same as yours. So Christian, did we answer it already?
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so recent events have resulted in a lot of stress for most people. Are there tips to manage stress that you recommend?
Yes, and this is really important around neutralizing the threat system. You know, is we have been experiencing in many ways chronic stress, and when you think of that and building mental toughness and building resilience, think of it as, what can I do in the moment, in that moment of panic and stress that I'm experiencing, and what can I do in the long range, in the long game. So let me go to in the long game. What can you do starting now to really build that strong resilience and navigate stress? So, you know, think it's almost like a set of vitamins that you take. And the most important one is prioritizing sleep. You know, it sounds so cliched, but prioritizing sleep is literally the most productive thing that we can do around synthesizing everything we learned in the past and bringing it all together in brain connections. So prioritizing sleep, making sure that you have a social connection. You know, human beings are social animals. So it doesn't have to be 100 people. It doesn't have to be the Facebook community. It's your core support system. Investing in social connections is very important for foundational stress management. Making sure you get some kind of outdoor time, you know, if you can, being out there in nature, or whatever form of nature it is, you know, sky, trees, in any place is really valuable. If you would like building some kind of mindfulness practice, there's huge amount of research around the neuroscience benefits of mindfulness, you know, which is just basically just a focus practice or a gratitude practice, spending a few moments, you know, thinking about and focusing. That's very important. Laughter, you know, is shown to have huge results in terms of making sure you have humor and fun and adventure in your life. And each of these pieces, you know, nutrition, hydration, of course, you know, drinking enough water, all of this build foundations around strengthening our baseline. Almost think of it like you're charging your phone. You know, you're the phone and you're charging yourself. And so when stuff happens and you don't have the charger, you have enough battery. You know, it's kind of that long range foundational stress. The other piece is the short term. What do you do in the moment? And this is all about using your body to impact your brain. And so what you do in the moment is consider, you know, what happens when the stress happens is your body temperature rises, your heart rate increases, your immune system, you know, it has an impact on your immune system, blood pressure is high, you know, you might even see like sweaty palms, things like that you might have experienced. And so consider, let's say, drinking a glass of cold water. What that'll do is it'll reduce the body temperature. It'll send a signal back to the brain that, oh, there is no line, like no one's going to come out there and kill you. You know, deep breaths. We talk about that a lot, but literally just for 1 minute, deep breaths, 6 deep breaths, reduces, you know, the breathing piece and sends again a signal to your body, to your brain that don't be hyper alert. Everything is going to be fine. And then, you know, just even cognitively saying, let's pause. I don't need to react right now. This is just my brain. You know, let me reflect. Let me look at long range thinking. Those types of things help in the moment as well.
Thank you. And then there's one last question here. Can you talk about more tips to minimize prediction errors in the brain?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is one of my favorite pieces because we often overlook the importance of what we consume. You know, we almost are on this autopilot around what is it that we are really ingesting into our brain's memory system, you know, in terms of even what we think, you know, what we think is a repetitive habit loop. And so the simplest tip I say is that be very intentional about what is it that you're consuming in terms of information. Am I reading this because I'm getting joy from it, like I'm enjoying it, which is absolutely fine because that's an ROI? Am I consuming it because I am going to, you know, empower my prediction system with strategic, big picture information? If neither one of those are met, and I'm just consuming it because I have literally didn't think about it or nothing better to do, consider stop. You know, consider, hey, it's not giving me any ROI. What else might I do, you know, in that time? So, or what might I shift to, you know, that gives me joy and that other piece. So for example, binging on Netflix, right? It gives us, like, we're enjoying that. So if you're enjoying the show, then watch it. If you're not enjoying the show, do not watch it. You know, go look at like whatever future trends of the workplace. So, you know, that's a
Right.
simple tip. Yeah. And then, you know, I have a lot more, but that's kind of a simple thing in terms of how to think about it.
Okay, and thank you for that. And I guess I'll just do my follow-up because I think it's a worthwhile question. You know, to the first one, how do you deal, right? So you said get out of your comfort zone, and I think part of getting out of your comfort zone is recognizing, like, okay, you're just not going to die doing this other event. But people are terrified, inclusive of myself. I think everybody has some of this of rejection and of failure. Even though I think failure is additive, meaning like as you fail, you end up building off it. But people are terrified of those two items. So and they're obviously connected. Is there any kind of tips you could provide in dealing with or prepare? I don't know if it's even preparing. Maybe it's just dealing with rejection and failure.
Yeah, so, that's a great question, and it has so many layers, to it. So let me first bring it to this lens of, of uncertainty and change, and then I'll talk about how to deal with it. So the thing here that we are talking about is introducing yourself to it, right? So introducing yourself to situations and experiences where there are all of these uncomfortable adverse outcomes that are possible. So threat of rejection, threat of failure, right? That's what we are talking about in building the habit around change. There, what I recommend when we work together in these partnerships, say, hey, how does that work out? Is what we recommend is let's do baby steps. Sometimes we don't want it to be so out of our comfort zone that the brain completely shuts down and it's just like we feel incapable of doing that. So it's almost think of baby steps or whatever your goal is, right? So each of the people here, the participants, think of whatever is your kind of big, hairy, audacious goal, right? And then deconstruct that into like the small baby steps and just do the little ones gradually. And then each step becomes easier and easier around that pace. And, do the worst case scenario thinking. What's the worst that's going to happen? As you said, right? Which is, hey, this person is not going to take my call, right? They're going to not respond to my email, or I'm going to F up the presentation, right? Whatever it is, it's okay. Is somebody going to die? 5 years later, is that going to be something that people will remember? Is this a one and done thing? How is it going to, so think of it from that long range. If my friend did it, would I think of it as that bad? And so in many ways, distancing ourselves from that piece makes it, normalizes it, and you feel I can do that. That's in introducing yourself to rejection. In the dealing with, if those things happen and they've already occurred and they've kind of behind us, I had this huge failure. That is away from the change piece. That is just thinking about how will this serve what I don't control is what happened from this moment onwards. I mean, this moment before, right? So everything from this moment prior is out of my control. Am I going to use my brain technology, my thoughts and my feelings, focusing on things that are out of my control, or am I going to leverage them to optimize what I can do next? In many ways, it's think of it like don't fight the Fed, right? If something is almost there, I'm going to leverage it, I'm going to maximize it, I'm going to optimize it for the future, and that's how you start building narrative. So in the work we do there, we talk about how are we going to build that narrative internally, how are you going to build that narrative externally, what are the steps you're going to take to repair the damage, all of those pieces, and then what habits can we build in the future to really extract the value from this gold, right, that we just experienced.
Thank you. Shefali, thank you so much for presenting to our clients today. That was great. I know I learned a lot, so I think we all from the whole Fountain team really appreciate you, providing and presenting here. And thank you, participants, for listening. Everyone have a great day.